Welcome to the Insights CPD Series presented by Academic Action. The Insights CPD Series brings top experts and institutions together. These sessions empower education professionals to enhance learning experiences and drive positive change within their institutions. If you would like to participate in our upcoming CPD sessions or explore collaboration opportunities, connect with us on LinkedIn or visit our website to register. For institutions interested in becoming part of our network and accessing exclusive opportunities, contact us today.
And welcome to this special CPD session on children's rights in the school context. My name is Paolo Rizzo, and I'm very pleased to be your host for today's event. We're very thrilled to be presenting today with our partner Aberystwyth University. For those of you who might not be familiar, Aberystwyth University is one of the UK's leading institutions, known for its rich history and commitment to education. By the way, I'd like to take this opportunity to share a bit of exciting news about Aberystwyth University in partnership with Academic Action. Is launching the pre-university summer camp for 2026. This is a fantastic opportunity for students to immerse themselves in the British culture, improve their English, and experience life at one of the most beautiful campuses in Wales. If you'd like to know more about that, please feel free to reach out after the section. Now I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Prysor Davies. Mr. Davies is Interim Head of School of Education and is a Senior Lecturer at Aberystwyth University. He is a Senior Fellow of Higher Education Academy and holds qualifications in Law, Primary Education, and School Leadership. His research focuses on children's rights in inclusive education and the impact of educational policies in diverse learning environments. Before we begin, could you share a little bit about what inspired you to focus your research on children's rights in education?
Yeah, my background is as a primary teacher. So I taught children from like 5 years old up to 11 years old. I was a school head teacher as well for a number of years before I came into training teachers in the university, and have continued as a lecturer and senior lecturer. I think the issue around children's rights has been of real interest to me, because I think oftentimes it's possibly misunderstood. I think there are different perspectives on rights depending on where you live in the world, what the issues are in your local area, and that fascinates me. I think in Wales and in the UK, there are certain perspectives on children's rights which may or may not be beneficial. And I think looking into that and how schools actually interact with those rights is where I'm studying at the moment. So I'm involved with schools and thinking how policies in Wales impact schools, how schools implement policies, and how children are affected by what schools and what the government is doing.
So thank you very much for that introduction, Professor. And I will now hand the session over to you to begin the presentation. We are very much looking forward to your insights.
In terms of today's session, what I would like, can you all see the screen? Is that okay? Just double checking.
Yes, we are.
Brilliant. Excellent. So 3 things I would like to do. Thank you, guys. 3 things. I want to just give a little quick overview of children's rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I know that many of you will be aware of this, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, as it were, and understanding the same things, I would like to think about children's rights in schools and what the discussion around that is. And then I want to think about some of the challenges. And because we are not in the same room and sitting around tables, I will ask you to reflect on your own situations and think how those challenges apply to yourselves. So, in terms of our starting point, as an introduction to children's rights, you may well be aware that children's rights is now framed in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC. Adopted in 1989, has been ratified, has been signed by many countries since then, and it provides that framework of rights for all children under the age of 18. And it relates to their survival, to their development, to their protection, and also to their participation in society. It brings children's rights into international law to all intents and purposes, although there are problems and difficulties around that. It is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history. So it's been accepted by the most countries. 196 states have ratified, have signed this agreement. I wonder, does anyone know of a country that has not ratified? If you do know, feel free to include it in the chat. Which country has not signed or has not ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child? Forgive me. The emphasis in the convention is on aspects such as non-discrimination, that children ought to be treated fairly regardless of their background, regardless of where they come from, regardless of how rich or how poor they are. They all ought to be treated appropriately. There's an emphasis on the best interests of the child. So organizations working with children in their decision making ought to make sure that the best interests of the child is what drives their decision making. So not financial pressures, not political decisions, but actually the best interests of the children. And the third aspect that is emphasized is the rights for children to have a say in decisions affecting their lives. And that is a little more controversial in terms of how that is applied and how that works out. Very often, this is noted as the 3 Ps of the convention: protection of children, provision for children, and participation, which is that element of taking part. I can see that Paolo has included in the chat that so one of the main states maybe that have not signed the convention is the United States of America. They have signed it in order to say that they are in general agreement with it, but they have not ratified the convention, and that means that they are unwilling to put their own laws under the scrutiny of the United Nations Convention. Now, in terms of the convention itself, if I can just show you this rather busy slide, it gives you an indication of some of the main articles. So we might start at the top with Article 2, which is that article, the rights of children not to be discriminated, not to be treated differently. We have the article in terms of the best interests of children. We have the rights of children to be guided by parents and carers to develop to their full potential. I wonder whether you've thought what it means and how practical is it to be developed to your full potential. whether you have ever developed to your full potential. I'm not sure that I ever have. Other articles are the respect for the views of the children, the right to information, the right to freedom of thought and belief, the right to freedom of association, to gather together as children and not to be restricted, the right to reliable information in order to make decisions, the rights for, particularly for children who may have disabilities, rights to adequate standard of living, the right to education, and Article 29, the type of education, the purpose of education. Children from minority or indigenous groups and the rights that they equally have, the same as other children, the right to leisure, to play, to have access to culture. And to a certain extent, one of the reasons for a session like this, Article 42 talks about children's knowledge of their rights. How do we ensure that children know about their rights and are able to act upon it? If you would, just for a couple of minutes, which one of these, or which ones of these articles do you think are the top priorities for you in your context? I'm very aware that I'm sitting here in Wales, in Aberystwyth, and that I am not aware of your particular contexts. So it would be helpful to know which of those articles do you think are the top 3 in terms of the priorities within your own school context. And if you can write them, if you can, in the chat, or otherwise just note them down yourself, which ones of those are most important from your perspective? I will keep talking as you think. It may be around maybe children with disabilities. It may be issues around the right to freedom of expression and the respect for the views of the child. Which ones do you think are most important from your perspective? That's really interesting. Alexandra has just noted that the right to education as the top one, because students are in war zones, and therefore access to education in that context is remarkably difficult. How do we ensure that children have their rights upheld in such context? Thank you, Alexandra. Is there anyone else with a comment, a highlight? The respect for the views and the freedom of expression. Yes, that's really interesting. And it's one of those difficult elements within a school context. And we'll get to talk about this in due course. And Maria, you know, the goals of education, how do we develop children to their full potential? How do we ensure that they achieve their full potential? And it's a question whether we, as educators, that we're able to do that, and whether the systems around us enable us to do that. That's really helpful. And I can see non-discrimination has been noted there, parent guidance, respect of views, and the knowledge of rights. If I can just move on very quickly, just to note some of the difficulties around the rights. The issues around age is a difficult one. The convention states that everyone under the age of 18 is a child and therefore should be under the convention and have the rights identified in the Convention. And yet, the Convention does say, unless the laws in your country state that childhood is of a different age. And there are some discussions, and there's a bit of uncertainty around the age definitions. I think there are difficulties in terms of variations globally. The Convention sometimes is regarded as a westernized perspective and doesn't really take into account different perspectives from around the globe. And that can be difficult to implement at times. I've noted some ideas that have come from Priscilla Alderson's article in terms of some common criticisms and difficulties. She notes that some see the Convention is about liberty, about freedom for children, more than about protecting children, that it gives too much emphasis on freedom for children, but should be more about protection. Some might argue, as she notes, that those freedoms can be dangerous for children. If we give children too much freedom, then that may be problematic. And we'll note this as we go further. It might give ideas for children of being greedy or being selfish and being irresponsible. And as Maria's noted, it is about having a balance and and that as educators is one of the difficulties that we have to face, is to strike that balance appropriately. Some might suggest that by emphasizing children's rights, that might undermine or affect children and parents' relationships. It might affect family life, and that may be difficult. The other perspective noted here is that some will suggest that the Convention, because at times it is possible to say, yes, we've done Article 1, we are successful in Article 2, etc., that people will then forget about children because countries have ratified the Convention. We're part of the Convention and therefore all is well. But that may not always be the case. So what about education and children's rights particularly? If I can just start by noting some of the terminology that's used around this, and we'll use it in general terms today. So terms that are used often are about children's rights education. So a particular education about children's rights. You'll see it in the literature as CRE, or sometimes it's noted as children's human rights education. And essentially, it speaks about the same thing. In other contexts, it's about human rights education. And these are terms that we'll take to mean the same aspect. And I think what's interesting and useful, and this comes from the UNICEF Rights Respecting Schools Award. So they have developed an award for schools that develop ideas and practices around children's rights. They talk about children's rights education as three aspects, and I think this is useful just to put a context to it. Learning about rights. So learning knowledge about rights, learning through rights, so that the education is influenced by rights, so it's not going contrary to rights, and also learning for rights, so that children actually have those rights in their lives and are able to apply that. And I think those three elements are really useful as we view rights in education. Learning about rights, learning through rights, and also learning for rights. A slightly different perspective is identified by Anne Quenistet, and she notes three aspects here in terms of children's rights education, and we might think about this in our own context. It's about access to education, being able to get to education, as has been identified already in the chat. It's about the content of education, but it's also about relations in education, relationships in education. And it's a different version, I think, of what we've just noted about learning about rights, learning through rights, and learning for rights. And if we just mention these a little bit as we go on, in terms of access to education, I've just set out a number of questions there that we might want to think about in our own contexts. When we think about children having access to education, and I think it was one of you mentioned that in war zones, it is very difficult for children to access education, and in many other contexts as well. And sometimes we think of that in terms of the numbers. How many children are able to access school, to come to school, etc. But maybe we can also think of it in terms of the quality of education. Sometimes children are able to attend school, but do they access the education? Can they access the education? Can they take part? Do they want to take part? So when we talk about access to education, yes, it's about the numbers of children going to school, but also what is happening in the school. Are they actually learning and engaging in that process? And very often, we might think about access to education as something which is important for the children, but very often the emphasis is on what parents are doing and to what extent parents are doing that. And issues that we might think about also. Do we think about access to education about the mainstream schools, the general schools in your country, or should there be specialized schools for particular children? Are we looking at that access for the most children, and it doesn't matter about minorities that are not able to access that education? Or are we able to provide an education for all? Is it an approach in terms of inclusion? Are we able to bring people in, ensure an education that fits for all pupils? Or do we have an exclusive method of education which separates children from each other? So there are a whole host of questions around the access to education. In terms of the content of education, what are we to cover in terms of content of education, particularly in terms of rights? Is it an emphasis on personal rights for individual children, or do we teach about the principles of rights? And to what extent do we support children and educate children about their rights so that they can activate those rights, that they can actually apply those rights in their own context? So there are different perspectives here. We can teach about rights to people without it really impacting children themselves. Do we want children to activate those rights? In terms of the content, what kind of teachers are we? To what extent is our teaching method influenced by rights and by children's rights? Because I know as a former teacher that very often it's easier to conduct classes in a certain way so that I have control, that children behave, that the lesson goes effectively. But is that the best way of teaching children? Does that support their rights? Am I teaching them through rights in that way? And our own personal worldview, our ideology, the way we think about things will influence the way we teach children in those contexts. And then the process choices. What kind of learning takes place? There is an emphasis, particularly in this country, on experience-based learning and how that can be useful, that children learn through their experiences, that they can participate. To what extent is that built in to the content of education in terms of what we teach? And then we've also have the element that Anne Quenister emphasizes, the relations in education. And maybe this, I can see Adriana has noted the emphasis on soft skills. The relations in education is so important from this perspective. And how those relationships impact on children, and the way we conduct ourselves and the way schools conduct themselves impact on children's rights. So some of the challenges I just want to share there. And as I say, it would be wonderful if we could all be in the same room and have discussions and share our ideas and our difficulties really around this. So what I want to do is just to share a number of challenges and thoughts around the difficulties of implementing children's rights in a school context. I would like you to think about those and consider how they might influence your own practices, your own school context. And I want to think about 5 aspects very quickly. So we'll go through them very quickly just so that we have some time at the end just to respond to any questions or comments that you might have. Issues around the society around us and how that influences our education, influences within the school itself, the structures of our schools and how that might influence the way we conduct children's rights, the environment and ethos within schools as well, and also the lived experiences of the children. So if we think about attitudes and beliefs within society, this is one of the challenges that we might face in terms of supporting children's rights, in terms of teaching children's rights. The society around us might see the teaching about rights as being problematic. They might see it as developing children as rebellious children who challenge the status quo. It might be an emphasis to challenge political ideas if they are in society or within the school. So if children's rights education is transformative, if it transforms children's ways of thinking, how problematic is that maybe in your context? Does the society around you not want that? At times, some have suggested that the emphasis on children's rights might be too individualistic. It emphasizes each individual and that education should be applied separately to each individual child and applied in the way they need it. And can education be that adaptable? Is it better to have universal values taught in terms of rights rather than individual personal rights. In other contexts, some might suggest that empowering children with regard to their rights and giving them the suggestion that they have rights and should be able to act on them may not be enough. Is it radical enough? So you've got the two balances here of either teaching children's rights might be regarded as too radical and has an emphasis on a political activism in children, which might challenge things, whereas some might think that it's not sufficiently radical and doesn't actually change children's rights. Cardenas has suggested human rights education, which we can take children's rights education as the same idea, is, she says, inherently revolutionary. If it's implemented effectively, it has the potential to generate social opposition alongside rising demands for justice and accountability. Now, that may be difficult to implement. It may be one of the difficulties that you might find in your own context. It suggests that it is revolutionary, and that may be difficult to gain support for it. So that's attitudes in society. In terms of attitudes and beliefs in schools, our perspectives on children influence how we teach about children's rights. Do we consider them as active learners, as competent people, not as children who need to be told, but actually as individuals who have that competency to develop understanding and to grow in maturity and respond maturely to contexts? And that might be difficult. In any school, I suspect, there are different perspectives with regard to different teachers. Some will see children as those who need to be given information and they should learn it, whereas others see children as those who can be nurtured and developed to think for themselves and to develop that maturity of thinking. And this is a difficult balance to negotiate. You may not have that support. It influences the way we teach, the pedagogy within our classroom. And there are questions about our perspectives on children's emotional development. Are they able to deal with issues of rights and those difficulties? Are they mature enough? And those influences may be problematic in terms of our school context. And then in terms of actually teaching about children's rights, those issues around whether children are rights holders or whether we as adults look after their rights for them. And that may be problematic in the way that we think about children's rights education. It may be problematic in your own school context in terms of senior leadership and those making decisions. There are those questions, that radical questions in terms of the issues around authority in the classroom, and to what extent do you enable children to gain more control in terms of what they're taught, how they learn, and what are the values around their voices. To what extent can children engage and have a voice about what is happening to them? Other issues may be around the structures of schools. When we want to implement ideas around children's rights, the structure and the way schools are run may make that difficult. If schools are run from what we might say a top-down way, where decisions are made by the leadership and everybody else has to follow, that includes teachers, that includes the children. And that may be a difficult scenario to change when we think about giving children access and an understanding of their rights. It's also difficult because very often education is politicized. It becomes a political football, which is kicked around, and the ideas around education become a part of politics, and decisions are made which are not necessarily made for the children's best interests. So there may be decisions made by others about how the school is run, what kind of pedagogy you should be using within the school, which is made at a policy level, which then influences how you can implement children's rights. And very often, teachers may be disempowered by such contexts. They may be unmotivated. I'm sure we're all here with our own sort of passion for teaching, but sometimes it can be difficult, and it can be difficult to work against a system that may not value children and their rights within education. We may also want to think about the structure. So think about the structure of your own school environment, the physical environment. To what extent does that give children their own rights, their own ability to think about their education, to learn in ways that are suitable for them, and to what extent that is not possible because of the physical environment, maybe the social environment, the way pupils interact with each other, the way relationships between pupils and staff are, and how that will influence the rights agenda within the school, and the culture around that also. Maybe think also about the context that children do. And maybe this is one of the more difficult challenges of engaging with children. Rosenberg notes that children's rights education should have a meaning for children's rights, that actually children's rights education should impact the reality of their lives. So when we think about children's rights education, it's not just about rights. It's not just teaching about rights. It's not just about teaching through rights, but actually that those rights, as they learn about them, as they engage with them, it can actually make a difference to their own lives. So if children experience injustice, if children are unable to access education, if they are excluded, how do we ensure that the rights that are enshrined in the convention, are actually applied to their lives, and it improves their well-being, it improves their status as children, that they will not be impacted by others, that they are not discriminated against. And there are so many additional factors there that could be considered. Lundy Martinez Saints say children are taught about human rights or children's rights without necessarily learning what counts as breaches of those rights in the very context in which they are learning. So it is possible to speak about children's rights without it actually meaning anything to the children themselves. They may be acquiring important knowledge, skills, and values, and that's great. That's important. But they should be affecting change in their own lives and in the lives of others. The difficulty here, I think, is that when we apply discussions around children's rights and the principles of rights in children's contexts, we apply them in really difficult situations. They may be emotionally charged situations. There may be scenarios where, as teachers, we may not feel equipped, comfortable in dealing with the issues that are raised. So if there are issues of well-being, issues of safety, issues of protection, we may not feel equipped to deal with that. And structures need to be in place in schools to support teachers to deal with such issues. It may impact our confidence and our competence as teachers. Other aspects in terms of children's lived experiences and things that they experience in schools, if we think about approaches to school discipline, this is something that arises in the literature. What kind of, for example, school discipline is conducted within your context? We hear often, particularly in this country, about a zero tolerance approach. That means we don't accept any of that kind of behavior. But very often that overlooks children's contexts, reasons why children might be having difficulty in behaving in school. So an authoritarian approach to school discipline may not align with children and their rights because they have no opportunity to talk about where they are, why they are behaving in such a way. There is an emphasis in literature about restorative justice, that actually children should be able to talk about those who misbehave, as well as the victims of misbehavior, should be able to have that opportunity to talk and to dialogue around the issues that have led to the situation that they're being disciplined about. Why have they behaved in such a way? To what extent do they understand the impact they have had on others? So that issue of participation, of having a voice, having that freedom of expression related to the matters that relate to them is important. If they don't, then issues of fairness, their understanding of what is fair for them, what if they are being protected, if they are safe, may be impacted. And that in turn clearly are issues of rights. But it's important to remember that having participation, having a voice, is not absolute. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should be able to say exactly what they want when they want it. There is a need for restraint and control and responsibility in those contexts. So we've noted these different challenges within society, challenges within schools, attitudes, challenges, if you like, challenges of school structures, of the school environment, and the lived experiences of schools. Which one of those is most difficult for yourself, or which is the greatest challenge for yourself in your own context? Or is it something different when you seek to teach about children's rights and to think about so it's about society's attitudes, a couple of you have said. So it's about the difficulty of trying to ensure that children's rights are implemented, that they're taught, that children are taught through their rights and it impacts their lives, but that society is saying something different. Is that a fair summary of what you're trying to suggest there? Thank you. Yes, I think that's really interesting, and I think that is a real issue. So how do we address those social issues? Because that is such a big issue. How do we change mindsets in society? It's not always, well, it's never easy from that perspective. One of the aspects that may be worth noting is that when children's rights education is used in a whole school manner, when a school can take on children's rights education and ensure that it is embedded throughout the school, then this does have positive impact on disadvantage, on inclusion, on diversity. It can begin to change society from the inside out, if you like. So if we are able to ensure that children are informed of their right, but also are able to ensure that their rights are supported and applied in their context, those small changes in your school context may well begin to show changes in society around as people see the impact on the children and on the society more broadly. Quenstead says, and I think this is an useful quotation just to finish with, for children and young people, education is life in all its facets. And for this reason, from the perspective of children's human rights, education is not only a question of developing skills and knowledge for the benefit of individuals as society, but actually is about living and growing together with others. So it's not just about developing that knowledge and those skills for another day, but it's actually about the life that children actually live within school and within the society that they live in at this very moment. I will finish there because we're swiftly running out of time. When you receive the copy, there are additional readings which are helpful at the end of the slides. And if there are questions outside of this session, you want to get in touch, then please feel free to email me or to get in touch with the School of Education.